employ smart people. Most people, even if they're not exactly trained to do the thing that you need them to do, if they're smart, if they're intellectually curious, if they're hungry, if they are team players, then amazing things will happen.
Wow, so even as like managing director, you have to sort of do a bit of that sales, account management, talk to customers, and do all those things.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common in ad tech. To be honest, when I was at Google, it was pretty much the same. Now, obviously at Google, because I was looking after many bigger customers, then the types of people you're talking to and the conversations you have are different. So they tend to be more partnership-based, strategic-based, talking about what the two companies can do together. So if I look back at the time I was looking after like the big four banks, like Brian Hartzer, when he was heading up Westpac, is not going to want to talk about, what's Google's latest search products and campaign settings. He wouldn't even have a clue because his world is so much bigger than that. But I think I've always believed you have to kind of, keep reasonably close to what's going on the ground, not in the minute detail, but I think it's important to understand what the challenges are. And therefore, when you go and see customers, even if you're having a different level conversation with, let's say, the CMO, you still want to be able to, as the rest of the team is sitting there and discussing why isn't the lower funnel retargeting campaign returning the same ROI as it used to last year, you still need to be able to talk to that and to talk to that pain point they have in their business. Because especially in retail, like the rag trade is, lives day by day. They look at their sales day by day. E-com businesses often hour by hour, and they notice, changes in return on ad spend and things like that. So you need to be able to convincingly sort of walk in their shoes and then also walk in your own company's shoes and be able to sort of understand where sometimes the two are not quite aligned. And then you have to kind of be honest and say, yeah, we've probably drifted away from what you need us to be. So let's recenter on what you need us to be. Let's fix that issue for you. And then let's talk about maybe some like bigger trends that are happening. And I think it's that pivot from, macro to micro and micro back to macro that I think they appreciate, that you're not just wafting in and glad handing and just sort of cutting ribbons. You're there kind of understanding their pain and also the failings of your own company. And the good thing about retail is they're not afraid to tell you.
Interesting. So what's sort of your role as an MD? Like, what does a managing director do? Like, what's your KPI? Is your KPI increase the amount of revenue that comes from Australia Criteo, or yeah?
Broadly speaking, yes. So my main KPI is, take the Australia New Zealand share of the revenue responsibility for Criteo and grow that by X amount. Now, I think when you're in Australia, the amount of money that we're going to make is you're never going to be the top country for revenue, because we're not like a developing market. You won't be the top country for growth. So it's getting that sort of compromise between the two of saying, we can give you above mature market growth rates because we're still a country where the population is increasing, the economy does pretty well, it's a rich country. So we can definitely punch above our weight in terms of like revenue per population. But then there's also so there's a kind of total revenue component, which isn't shabby for Australia. It's I think that's pretty true for most companies around the world. And then you've got that sort of growth element. And you're not going to be that 50% growth market typically. But during COVID, Australia was behind on e-com compared to most peer countries. So we probably had most to grow, and we were the fastest growing market during COVID, because of probably the relatively low level of e-com adoption in Australia. And most people go to Westfields and local shopping centres and stuff. But then the position I think Australia has, and this isn't just applied to my business, I think we have an ability to like test and trial and innovate here. We're a small enough market, we can get things done. There's a reasonable concentration of businesses in most sectors, so that you can go, you might sort of say, okay, as the banking sector of Australia is, it's big for Australia, but in a global scale, you might say not so much. But actually, when I look at the big four, people like CommBank and ANZ are world-class leading in their field because I think they innovate. If you've got the CommBank app, you know how amazing it is compared to, I also have a global bank that I have, and their app is nowhere near as good. And I think that's the ability of Australia to be able to sort of innovate and push stuff. And in retail, which is still the predominant part of our customer base, that hasn't typically been the case. I don't think Australian retail is necessarily been at the forefront for e-com and digital marketing, but there are complete exceptions in that. And you see some really good companies who are really eager to innovate. And it's relatively easy for them to get that happening. Whereas if you go to a UK, German, French, US company, they're so much bigger that getting all of that signed off can sometimes take a lot longer, either from our side, as in like the vendor side, or from the customer side. So that's the way I see it. And I say to my team, we don't have to be the fastest growing, we don't have to have the biggest revenue, but we should be like the most innovative and give things a go. Because I think Aussies are reasonably open to new ideas. Being a small, physically large country, but small population, the other side of the world, I think Aussie, coming in as a Brit, then I think Aussies spend a lot of time looking for best practice from other markets, which I think is fine. It's then about how do we actually make best practice here, because some of those things, like when I was working at Google on Google Pay, or what was Android Pay before, we were the sort of joint second market to launch after the US because we had high adoption of contactless pay. It was relatively easy to do the deals with a small number of banks here and cover a large percentage of the market. And there was a lot of innovation in that sort of fintech, transaction account banking space. So yeah, that's kind of a lot of what I do is trying to drive that growth. And then, I'm not the person in our platform setting up campaigns, I'll be honest. I can go in there. I do sometimes go in there to kind of find out answers to questions that when my team aren't around. But a lot of what I do is trying to set the team up, either structurally in terms of, the org chart, the mission, understand from them what they see as the ways that we can get growth, and therefore achieve my mission. And in doing so, try and create a happy team that we don't have too much churn. And I think we've been reasonably successful at that. We don't have a huge amount of staff churn, which is unusual in this industry.
Interesting. So on a macro level, what would you focus on that would increase growth? Would it be building more sales teams? Would it be doing a lot of brand awareness sort of campaigns for Criteo? Would it be educating the market and teaching them how to be more innovative when it comes to retail?
Good questions, Andy. Principally, I think you can get growth in a number of different ways. One is looking at your current business and exact same customer set. So we've been very sort of planted in the retail sector because the product works supremely well there. So you say, okay, so how can we increase our penetration of our existing client base? And therefore, the way that you can do that is either you're under-penetrated and therefore persuading people that they could be investing more and getting more out of you. So that's one thing that you can do. Another one is by having more products, and Criteo has got a lot more products since I joined. It was more or less a one product company when I joined, more or less, and is now a multi-product company. So you can go back to the same customers and say, we've got more solutions for you that can assist your business. Or you can go into other sectors. So, we can go into, like, let's say, finance or education or auto sectors, which we've been, either not present at all or underrepresented because maybe we didn't have the focus there, the skills, talent, or maybe the right to play in that space at the time with the product suite that we had. So you've got that choice as well. Or you can kind of go for channels that you've not looked at before and markets you've not looked at before. So in our business, we were very direct to business, B2B direct relationships with some agencies who were there, like media agencies who were there sort of perhaps like incidentally to that relationship. So a good example of that would have been maybe like the Good Guys. The main relationship that we had was with the Good Guys client, but then they had Dentsu as an agency, and they've subsequently changed that to an agency called Half Dome. So you have those sort of incidental relationships, but as a channel to market, we weren't particularly agency friendly. And so there's two things that happened. Number one, I saw that as an opportunity. So, like we can probably double our market share if we become agency friendly and focus the team on agency sales. And the second thing, you need to have, your business needs to actually be interesting to agencies. And so, can they add value to your offering for the client? Can they make money out of it? And are you a good and easy and trustworthy partner to work with? So then you need to explain all those things, which then comes to your third point, which is, do we do branding and marketing and push ourselves and get our name out there? And so with the agency community, they're pretty across most sort of vendors and technologies and options, but not intimately. And so we had a big job to do there. So that's about going around those groups, engaging with them, listening to them, understanding what they need, and then going back and saying, okay, this is what we hear from you. This is who we are. And a lot of them, it's part of their remit to go and constantly scan the market for, best in class propositions. And then the other part of that is, be out there, be more present. And so you and I connected with each other at the IAB debate session. That's the sort of thing I think that the Criteo didn't traditionally get involved in. It wasn't a full sort of, I guess, ad tech industry player or representative, because we had our little niche to play in. And I think it was a bit too comfortable for us to sit just in our own little space and try and eke out as much of that space as we could, which is very much like going and talking to direct clients and saying, do you want to increase your online sales, etc.? We can help. And so now we're more than that, and we got more upper funnel products. We realized that we need to be more part of the ecosystem, and so therefore we need to be out there, present and talking to people, meeting people in the industry like you and the guys from the IAB and agency folk and direct clients and things like that. Because if you're not keeping your ear to the ground and being in those opportunity moments to make a new connection, somebody else is, or if nothing else, then you're unlikely to be able to expand your business without being out there and seeing what's going on.
Yeah, I think that was a really smart move, because that debate club, it was like a really small niche of sort of high level sort of audience, and everyone was highly targeted and in that space, and everyone was in marketing. So it was like a highly targeted sort of sponsorship, and I think that was a really smart move.
No, thanks. And look, those opportunities, they don't have to cost a lot of money. You, I, anyone can organize a kind of meetup, and if you've got the right sort of network and audience, then you can pull people together. And I think what I love about this industry is that on the whole, I would say 90% of people are out there continually learning, because the sector changes all the time. Technology is changing all the time. Trends in marketing are changing all the time. In a way that's not, I started my life in the automotive sector. A lot of those mega trends are quite slow and big, like now moving to electric vehicles and things like that. It's not like month by month. In our sector, it is. There's something new around the corner. There's another challenge. There's a new competitor. There's a new fad. And so you need to sort of keep on top of those things. And therefore it's never boring. And yeah, it's good to, go out there, sign up to the newsletters, go along to these sort of events, watch the TED Talks, all this sort of stuff. Educate yourself, because it's not just it's good for business. It's fun doing so, and you keep yourself reasonably fresh. And I'm not as fresh as many people out there who spend a lot more time, out there connecting and going to every single conference and opportunity. So from your perspective, what are the things that you see, the differences between, marketing approaches and the way that people kind of connect?
So I think right now, a lot of LinkedIn has been surprisingly popping off. I was surprised, I kept hearing LinkedIn, and then I sort of went on it, and then there's a really strong network effect where you're posting content, friends of friends are seeing it. All the recruiters are on LinkedIn, and surprisingly, all these sort of corporate people, business people, they're on it like all day long, and it's an easy way to get responses. And I'm getting people, professionals, podcast guests, they're getting back to me, like high-level people are replying to me on LinkedIn, where I would never get a response on email or Instagram or any other platform. So I think LinkedIn is a really amazing place where it's like a hub with just highly professional people. I've been trying to figure out and play around with the LinkedIn ads. I haven't figured it out yet. The CPMs are like maybe 2 to 3 times more expensive than Facebook, but I think it's worth it because the audience is more targeted. And I think right now LinkedIn is still untapped. Like I recently found out that you can just scrape emails using tools, and I could literally, if I want to target, say, people in the corporate sales field that are in Australia, and there's like 10,000, I could get a list of 10,000 sort of highly target qualified people to just cold email out to. So that was the biggest like hub I see, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I do get a lot of like industry updates and innovations and kind of snippets and news from LinkedIn. So in my feed, I would say I get 1 or 2 requests to connect with people like per day. Many of them might be really sort of random speculative people from emerging markets around the world, and it's probably they're getting more out of the connection than you're likely to. But as you're going in there, sort of screening those people, I tend to be, I hope I'm reasonably generous and happy for people to sort of connect into my network. But then that's when you see your news feed and you find out like people that you kind of in your network, what are they up to? And let's be honest, we're all busy people. I don't keep in contact with every single person that I've ever met in my professional career. So it's good to kind of just be reminded of like, oh yeah, that's what happened to person X. But also, yeah, today it was news about the Google I/O conference and launches and things like that. There was an article about like Jason Tonelli talking about how the Razorfish brand is being resurrected within Publicis, etc. And those are really useful snippets that come along. And then as well as like from people like yourself, where there's like, hey, you're invited to attend this like webinar, dial in, whatever it happens to be, and those things, some of them you can't attend everything and you can't participate in everything, but something 1 in 50 or whatever really catches your eye and you're like, yeah, do you know what, I'll sign myself up for that. That's probably I believe you need to be reasonably actively involved. And then for those who know me decently well, I post a reasonable number of articles on there. I don't know how many people are reading them, but it makes me feel important with myself and being able to tell myself at night that at least I'm important to myself.
Yeah, I think at first when I went on LinkedIn, it was like a bit weird or spammy. Everyone sort of had personas. You would get all these spam messages. But as I've digged into it more and more, I can really see how this is feeling like Facebook 2008, where people are going on LinkedIn to share what they're doing, share the recent event they went to. And I'm seeing people literally join the platform, post once or twice, get the sort of engagement they're looking for, and now they're posting more and more oftenly. So I'm seeing people convert from a casual LinkedIn user to an avid LinkedIn user, and that's not something I've seen. Like Facebook has sort of died off, Instagram is slowly sort of falling off, and LinkedIn is sort of on this uptrend, and I'm definitely feeling that.
Yeah, but one thing at the start of COVID I thought was one of the most beautiful and thoughtful things I've ever seen in my professional career. There was a person who was having to let their team go because they, a slug of business in COVID. They didn't know whether they were going to survive. And this person wrote, I'm unfortunately having to make this decision to let these people go. However, these people are absolutely amazing, and if any of you have an opportunity for them, please, if I can use this as an opportunity to, find another, career for them, then, that will make me feel better about myself and it will help these people. And I just thought it was a really lovely thing to do, to actually use it for something that's, a real calamitous situation, and to just leverage the platform and your voice out there and your network to say, look, hey, I can't help these people in my team, but maybe you can. You've got to believe that those people had a much better chance of finding a new role so during a tough time. And also, I think it just shows the character of the person who did that. And I thought, if I'd have thought of doing that, and I'm not as thoughtful as that person, I would have patted myself on the back. I thought it was just an amazing way to use a platform for good.
Most definitely, and I think the community is sort of built for that, where I think a post like that would just go viral on LinkedIn because that's sort of the correct market fit for that type of content, and it's still small enough where you can do something like that, and it does create a small dent within that day within LinkedIn, whereas you can't have that impact on these other social media platforms anymore.
No, yeah, that's a good point. It's a small enough community, as you say, because it's a sort of self-selecting sort of professional network, which by and large doesn't get too exploited. I mean, you do, as I say, you do tend to get a few of those sort of outreach. I'm just trying to flog you something with no context, with no relevance to your business. The number of people who contact me to say, we can help develop your website. And it's like, well, I work for a global company. It's a B2B company. So that obviously our website is probably a less important part of our business anyway. And you should be able to work out that I probably don't manage it, being a French company, listed on the NASDAQ, and I'm just the MD of the Australian business. So you see a bit of that. People do sort of use it just for spamming. But I'd say that's the minority, or certainly that's been my experience.
On that topic, so platforms like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, they have their sort of own audience. They have a platform that attracts a large amount of audience, and they're able to run ads on their platform and basically sell their audience to sort of advertisers. Whereas Criteo, you guys sort of have to arbitrage, where you guys don't have your own platform and you have to make basically the split, whereas Google, Facebook, they just make 100%. How do you compete with those big guys if that's the case?
Yeah, you're right. Any sort of destination place like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Google, etc., has the massive benefit of having sort of house inventory. Obviously, it's not completely free because they've got to pay for an army of engineers and the staff and everything that comes out of that. But still, you're right. In the case of display, if you look at sort of, I guess, where Google might be a bit different to Facebook is mostly Google is paying other people. They are arbitraging between a host of small, from some very big publishers, like News Corp, whatever, all the way down to, mom and pop shops that might get 20 impressions a year, whatever the minimum threshold is. So they have the GDN, and they have like the sort of I guess the B2B version of that, which is the real kind of core enterprise version of that, which is authorized buyers, used to be known as AdX. So yeah, they make a cut on that to be able to share between those publishers and then people who buy that inventory. And then they make that inventory also available via authorized buyers to people like ourselves, and we can on-sell that. I think in any arbitrage model, it's how much value you're adding. In the same way that a supermarket is adding value to someone who makes bread and puts it in plastic wrappers, and then you buy it and consume it, that the value that they're adding is, bringing it to you and curating that and negotiating a good price, bringing their logistical talent so it's always in stock, fresh, et cetera, et cetera. So they're able to make a markup on that product. And that is fundamentally how we can take Facebook's product or the GDN, the authorized buyers product, and add value. So our value that we add is the technology we have in terms of which parts of their inventory pool are we interested in buying, because it's not all of it. So we've got intellectual property in our AI engine that works out like which are the right environments to bid for, rather than all of them, just only bid in certain environments. Which users are worth bidding for, because there's some people who never click on ads, and there's certainly people who click on ads but never buy off the back of that. So which users to go for, and then in our case, in the traditional product, we used to sell like what products to show them, and then the associated products that they might be interested in. So you're adding a level of IP and curation on top of a commodity buy, which is, impressions that a publisher is basically selling. And so, as well as us having some direct relationships with core publishers like, Gumtree and News and Channel 7 and realestate.com.au and things like that. So, maybe we're getting at a slightly more advantageous price, or having a direct connect with that business rather than going through another, exchange like authorized buyers. So that's where we add value, and therefore that's where we can make margin. But of course, your margin is therefore always being called into question, and your value is always being called into question. And that's why typically Criteo, unlike Google and Facebook, is rapidly held to a sort of ROI, ROAS, whatever you want to call it, number, because there's always the sense of, well, what are you actually delivering? If I spend $1 here, what are you giving me back? If we end up buying expensive inventory, or inventory that people don't click on, or ads that don't convert, then that's, that creates a problem for us. And so that's what keeps us on our toes, which means our IP needs to be that much better than our competitors, which it is. And I genuinely think that. I'm not just being a company loyalist in saying that, but when we go head to head with our competitors, we generally create better results, which is ironic given that, Google and Facebook have that inventory as house inventory, but they will have segmented that into a kind of like a wholesale arrangement that they make one part of the money in, but then other parts of the business are adding, like for GDN, they're adding, like, again, an extra margin, as we are, for that extra IP, which is not just can I find the inventory and buy it, but can I make smart decisions and add value to the decision-making process and create an outcome.
Interesting. One thing that you brought up that it totally slipped my mind is, you're right, Google is sort of arbitraging, because they pay their sort of bloggers, they pay the YouTubers a portion of the ad spend. So they're basically arbitraging just like sort of any arbitraging sort of ad tech company. And that just makes platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok all more powerful, because they don't really pay their audiences.
You're right. And I think that's why Google traditionally has not, like, the biggest part of its business is not the display business, because it has, search is, it's, aside from the overheads of running Google, is all profits, because it's an owned and operated property. When you go to YouTube, then because it only sells that either direct or via DV360, then it's probably in a slightly more comfortable position. And it's an owned destination, even if the royalties have to be shared with the content creators. When you come to sort of, let's say, the publishing network, so the GDN network, then that's a real commodity type of buy that they are having to sort of share without bringing a huge amount of extra value other than just the buying and selling platform. Whereas, so Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest, etc., they're all, they sell, display on their websites directly. And again, like Google has with search, their only cost is the cost of running the platform.
Now, do you think platforms like Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn would benefit from a model similar to YouTube, where the creators would get paid a royalty or a cut? Or why do you think they haven't done that?
Well, I think the nature of video creation was very much that, like, you'll place ads in that directly, like insert it, like, in stream, and the relationship sort of with that type of community is more analogous to like a sort of TV type of buy, and the creators are creating sort of unique content. Now, you could say that would be true for TikTok. So they do have to share revenue. So that's just correct myself there. They do have to share revenue with people who are creating videos and monetizing their videos in the same way that YouTube does. But if you look at YouTube, that is where the point of kind of uniqueness arises, is in the creators putting that content up and then having to share it. Now, that could be you and I creating content, or it could be one of the massive, media houses posting their content up on their website, 21st Century Fox or Viacom or whoever it happens to be, and they want their the amount of money that they want back. They want a professional return. If you're a mom and pop shop and you're just placing ads, your content that might be your unique content, but that ad that you're placing is sort of on your content and sort of very incidental to it. Whereas it sort of follows more like the newspaper model, whereas YouTube has sort of followed more of that TV type model. So I think they are kind of different. It's easy to click on a publisher's site away from a site that you've only read a short article on, and then go off and browse on an ad. In that TV environment like YouTube, they've got to be persuaded to kind of come out from what they're watching, which is sort of more passive entertainment. So I think the formats dictate a slightly different approach to monetization. And when I was at Google, there is a tension between a bunch of people at YouTube who want people just to carry on watching more and more clips and seeing more and more ads interspersed with those clips, versus another team who are trying to get people to click on ads within that stream and then come out to the YouTube environment. And I think that's a tougher call, and therefore it is a different sort of way of monetizing, or the format of monetizing than a relatively static web page. And I think one just went down that newspaper route, and the other one's gone down more of a TV route.
Interesting, because recently I've been sort of going into a dilemma where, one, I'm realizing the power and the value from users, whether they're free or paid. Where studying.com, we previously sold a program, a course that's very in-depth, that taught people everything from e-commerce to marketing to Facebook ads, drop shipping, and the program would be anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. Now we're sort of slowly pivoting to like a free to play model where people can get modules for free. They just have to put in the work and complete modules to unlock the next one. And we've added in referral mechanisms, and we're sort of scaling the product down from $5,000 down to zero, with these sort of hypotheses that with the referral mechanisms, flywheel effects will kick in. And since it's free, it's a much easier sell through word of mouth, since it's free, and it's a $5,000 product that's now free. And hopefully if the free model reaches 100 times more people than the paid model, then it would have paid off. Now we just have to test it to see, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, there's a whole sort of freemium, premium, subscription choice to be made out there. And if you look at, let's say, what happened in streaming services, you've got what came out of commercial ad-funded TV, like that was funded by soap operas and things like that. So an completely ad-funded TV network did very, very, very well, and then it sort of then spun back round to like a Netflix, more like cable subscription type model. But in Netflix example, removing all the ads. And I think you've seen now, as you reach in that case, high quality, unique to them content that people are willing to pay for. And then as you've seen time go on and the proliferation of those types of channels, then you're getting more and more like ad funded kind of stuff coming back in. And you can end up in that sort of world of either, you can be very black and white and say we are only subscription focused and without ads, or you can be in that world where it's all like it's ads and the whole thing's free, or you can be in that half world. Like, so let's say you pay for the Economist subscription. You've got most of the revenue is probably coming from the subscription service, but then there's still ads that appear in that environment. And so I think if you carry that into whichever particular model, whether it's like an app that is giving you free content, but then to access better facilities or to remove ads, you pay. I think you have to, different sectors are going to be able to pull that off more easily than others. And the uniqueness of your content and the value that you have, I think, makes a big difference as to whether anyone is prepared to pay for it at all. So if you look at, let's say, the AFR here, the AFR has unique content about business that other journalists are not covering typically. It's also going to a community that has higher disposable income. In many cases, it can be either set against taxes or paid for by the company, etc. So the AFR has a much greater right to be able to charge for its content, even though it would still carry ads, than, let's say, the Daily Mail, which has got much more lifestyle and celebrity gossip and all that type of content. So it's harder for, though, if you don't have really unique content, but you're just aggregating a whole load of news stories from around the planet that you haven't paid an army of journalists for, or that all of the intrinsic nature of the story doesn't have any real deep value beyond entertainment, then you're going to struggle. You need to sort of work out how much people are likely to pay for it. Like for anything, what's the demand? If there's strong demand, then perhaps the subscription model works. If people if it's something that's new and they don't quite understand it, that sort of freemium model of start off either number of articles that you can read, and then you have to start paying weeks of days or weeks of free content, or like a really segregated, you can access the sort of more generic, easier to find elsewhere content for free, but as soon as you want to dip inside the really unique stuff, then you have to pay. And I think each situation is probably deserves its own kind of approach. But then equally, you look at something like Netflix or Disney Plus and Paramount, all those things, a lot of them are looking to see whether there's another ad-funded model out there that can supplement and maybe appeal to a different demographic. Not everyone can afford 4 or 5 different subscription streaming services. So I think you'll see a bit more of a rise of AVOD come back in. So long answer and probably not a very full answer to your question, but
yeah, because I think with my experience, I've learned that with each one of those models, it would work if you put in a lot of effort, tweak the things, tweak the conversion rates, and figure out the value per customer. You can make it work. But it's sort of a bit of like you're sort of fighting the wave, you're really pushing against the wall. To find the perfect model for your business, would the answer just to be test everything and find one where it just clicks much easier than the rest of the things?
Yeah, in most cases, I think you can model what can happen. So if you have, let's say, 100,000 people accessing your content for free, and then maybe, I don't know, I'll go to the other extreme, 10 if you charge $1,000 a year, then you can probably draw the slider and create the graph and say, okay, where is the if I charge you $10 a year, how many people does that wipe out? And then go and do some tests. One really inspirational speaker that I've seen a couple of times now in the US, and he teaches at Stanford University in the Singularity University there. And he talks about like pretotyping. So rather than prototyping, in this case, where you might sort of try, like do a test and learn with real subscriptions, and like makes like a real impact to your business decision, is you can sort of try and do stuff which, let's say you create a web page and then like a pop-up and sort of says, you can access this, the first 100 users can access this unique content for, $50 a year. And then when you click on it, even if you haven't got any of that unique content, if that's not what you've got, but you're thinking, how do I work out? Then you click on it and say, oh, unfortunately you didn't make it into the 100, but here's a, $5 Coles voucher, whatever it happens to be. You can do something you can test things at a very, very low cost and very, very quickly, and get to your answer faster than by doing very large built-out tests that need really high statistical significance. And I thought that was really fascinating. So the example that we worked on was, McDonald's wanted to launch, see whether there's interest in selling, spaghetti bolognese. What do you do? And, we came up with different answers. And the best I think people got to was, you just pick one store and then you would, have some spaghetti bolognese and you'd see what you can charge for it and change the price. And he said, no, just put it up on the screen. It doesn't cost you anything to add it to the menu. And then when people come and order it and say, look, it's been so popular, it's sold out, but here we are, you can get a half price Big Mac instead. And it costs you virtually nothing. And you can do that in every store. So you can get to a larger sample for very little cost. And then you've got the answer very quickly. In the same way that, Tesla would be out there with a new model and looking for deposits. And therefore, it's announced at a Tesla event. They say, put your deposits down, and that helps them gauge interest, like real genuine interest, not just people saying that they're interested, but actually people putting $1,000 down or whatever, interested. That gets them much closer to knowing whether it's worth investing in that, launching that model or not. I was like, that's smart.
Now, talking about Tesla, how they do zero marketing and zero sales. And I guess Elon Musk's sort of hypothesis is this whole sector, which is usually a giant sector for sales and marketing, if you just put all that budget towards more developers and bettering the product itself, the word of mouth would kick in and you would generate more sort of results than if you went ahead and cut the sort of product team and sort of invested in sales. And that was all a hypothesis, and it sort of paid off, and it's a pretty big and risky move.
It is, and I guess he's not the first person to have been like, in this case, there's a cult of personality, so he is the brand as well as the proof points behind the product. And there are other people like Richard Branson who've kind of pulled off similar stunts without and either challenge the distribution model, so going direct to consumer rather than through agents or dealers or whatever, but also a la Steve Jobs, he is a showman and able to convey the product exceptionally well himself. And so I think he can do that. You're right, I think he's ballsy as well. And I think he's been consistently ballsy on a number of things over a long period of time that people probably believe in him, like with Steve Jobs, is sort of making very, very bold claims. And there's I know he's not American originally, but he's an American now. And I think Americans have a lot of belief in sort of faith, and the sort of the way that they grow up is sort of believe in the vision and believe in faith, and the word of the pastor in the local church and things like that, I think carries a lot of weight, and I think can be very, very effective. If you're on the flip side and you are an introvert and you're struggling with that, and you just come up with and for example, I know that like Honda in Australia have decided to sort of move away from a sort of concessionary model with dealers to an agent model where there's no price negotiation. It's still kind of the same setup, but like Mercedes, like they've done, is like and like let's say Miele do with appliances or Apple do with authorized sellers, they're not really able to discount, or there's very strict rules about discounting. You have to be prepared, I think, to wear the consequences of that. And if you started as a business where you're expecting to be able to go in and buy a Honda Civic and negotiate 5% off the price, if suddenly you don't, you do have to expect that your sales will fall. Now, will you eventually get back to original position, or will your total profits be greater? That's a tough one. And I know that at the moment, Honda's being sort of pulled out for a dramatic drop in sales. I don't know what Honda's margins are like before or after to know whether that, let's say 30% drop in sales, equates to still like total either the same or better margin on a lower number of volume of units. But I do know in the car industry, having come from it, that you also need to keep a factory going. So whilst the sales and marketing team at Honda Australia might be making the same money total, I don't know whether they are or not, but I can assure you that the factory in Thailand or Japan, if they're pumping out less units, the price of the components will start to go up, because it's all about volume game. So, you are in that sort of, it can work. I think there are some unique examples like Virgin, like Tesla, like Apple, where the marketing is not being so much of a lever as like the PR, if you like.
Yeah, so I'm like trying to think, like most companies, they'll put in like $1 in marketing and they would expect like $1.70. It's consistent, it's reliable, it's consistent cash flow. Whereas people like Elon Musk and Tesla, they're hypothesizing that every dollar they put into product and engineering, they might get $3 out in revenue and word of mouth. It's a bit risky. And another thing I just figured out was once you go down one path, it's nearly impossible to switch and go to the other. Like a car company can't switch over.
Yeah, and I've seen that before. So like there's a case when I worked at Peugeot in the UK, the sister company Citroën, for a period of time it had, I wouldn't say a week, but it had a lineup of cars that was sort of dominated at the sort of the younger, smaller, like smaller cars at cheaper price points. And it found a formula which really, really worked well, which, the GST, like VAT over there, used to be 17.5%, I think it's 20% these days. And they came up with this, we'll give a big discount, whichever particular, recession or whatever it was like, we'll give you, save the VAT, nice and catchy message. So then suddenly they're like pumping out units of Citroen Saxos, which is, sort of the equivalent of Toyota Yaris or whatever. And they were pumping these cars out and hitting their goals, and they were feeling great. Now, was Citroen making a huge amount of money out of that? I don't know. Probably it'd be marginal because that's a lot of discount to give away. But I can tell you what, when you come along with nice product that's nice and fresh, and you're the Citroen dealer going, this is exactly what we want, then suddenly Citroen's saying, I want full price for this car. That is a tough game because they've built themselves as a brand where you go to get a bargain. And once you start that game, it can be a very, very difficult drug to come off. And so I think, we've got quite a few retailers who in early COVID, particularly bricks and mortar retailers in sort of apparel and footwear, they then started to go down a discounting path because at the start of COVID, we all thought the world was going to implode. So they've gone off down this discounting path. And now we're back into, like, let's say, well, I don't want to call this a post-COVID world, but let's say we're in a world where we're now living with the virus and it doesn't seem to be having the level of impact and drama that it was earlier. Then they're trying to sort of wind back those discounts. But if you've spent 2 years always being on sale and constantly bombarding people with emails saying 30% off, 40% off, 50% off, free shipping, etc., to suddenly go back to full price and $10 shipping, tough game. Some people will ride it out and they'll get to the other side and they'll reestablish themselves as not the discounting model. Other people will cave in after a few months because they just, their business is used to hitting these sort of volume numbers or, certain objectives. And, I can tell you in the car industry, when you're in that mode, so you can either do it discounts to customers, or they used to do it to the rental car companies. Okay, we need to just shift 500 cars at the end of the month to hit our numbers. Okay, we'll just give them to Avis at 30% discount, and we'll agree to buy them back at exactly the same price 3 months later. So you're not making a cent on them, but you just hit your numbers. And that drug suddenly becomes like more and more irresistible as the months go on and your sales numbers are harder and harder to achieve. It's like, okay, not 500 cars, we'll do 1,000 cars at 30% discount, and then 2,000 cars. And then suddenly the majority, that's why, maybe not now, because there's a global shortage of cars, but you turn up at Brisbane Airport and you go into the car park of those rental companies, you'll probably see the same manufacturers replicated across all the different rental car companies, because those are the ones who've have probably found themselves in that situation. Tough.
Interesting. Talking about that, now it's making me a bit worried from moving, because that pivot I'm making from like a $3,000 to $5,000 product down to free. Sort of what I did was, we have a program, it's 24 weeks, and I've broken it up into each week, and people can get the first week free. To unlock the next week, they would have had to earn enough studying coins from watching the previous week to unlock the next one, or they could refer a friend, or they can just buy the studying coins from someone else in the community. So I've added in referral mechanisms where one client can potentially turn into another 2, and those 2 turns into another 5, and it's all hypothesis. So I don't know if it would work, and if I go down this route and it doesn't work, is it going to be impossible for me to revert back?
Yeah, interesting. I don't know for your business. It's a relatively sort of niche area, so it's sort of, and you're not a big in-your-face household brand that then creates this sort of brand image of a company that either discounts or gives stuff away for free, whatever. So I think you probably have the ability to test and learn and pivot reasonably quickly without it sort of destroying the value that you have. If you look, like, I think Duolingo is a great example of an app that really started off as a sort of, we're just here to help you and help your language skills, and we'll try and fit some ads in maybe. Then the ads became more frequent. Then they became the sort of the premium edition for not a huge amount of money. And then you kind of get to that, okay, how many subscriptions can we get in a year, at what price? Is that enough? Does that create enough growth? Or are I now tapped out on all the people who are prepared to pay whatever it is, 60, 90 bucks a year, whatever it is, 120 bucks a year or something. And so have I tapped out on that opportunity? In which case, as Netflix has found, the only way to keep on increasing revenue then is to increase the price. And at a certain point, price then becomes a detracting factor. Then you get unsubscribes. So it's a very, I'm sure that there are very, very smart people out there in business and economics who kind of model a lot of this stuff out. But I know, I think you're doing the right thing, like test, learn, especially where people don't know what the value is. So if you have a very high value proposition that is very clear, so people sort of say, okay, I don't know, you can save my cat's life for $5. People go, that's a steal. Like you have, any single person who owns a cat would say, if I put that down and whatever happens, you'll be able to save my cat's life. $5 is a very small amount of money price to pay for a huge benefit. If you're asking for $1,000, what I'd say is that you need to be very clear of what that benefit is. And I think a freemium kind of model works well in that environment. It's sort of, you get people in, they see what the value is. Then how do you then extract value? How do you extract more money out of them? So can you walk them up, as you say, like in different gamified ways? Can you walk them up into either doing your marketing for you by spreading the word? Can you get them to subscribe for $5 a month? That then becomes, that's just a little bit better, and then $20 a month, and your product better than I do. So
I want to get your hypothesis or something, or your guess. So if Duolingo, for example, they had like a French beginner course, and then everyone can get that for free. Now people would come in, and then there'll be a French sort of intermediate. Now that would be, maybe they'll cost $100, or the student could unlock it by referring a friend. Rather than pay $100, they just refer a new person in. If Duolingo implemented a referral mechanism, would that blow things up, or why aren't people doing this more often?
It's a good question. I don't actually know the answer. I'll be honest. When you're talking in that sort of referral affiliate space, there is always the question asked, and I'm not an expert. You should, probably talk to the guys who sort of run big affiliate networks. I think there's always the charge, which is, would I have had this customer anyway? Or now have they gone to a website and found that there's a cheat way of doing it? And so if you're one of those affiliate companies, you think you've worked out all the ways to sort of stop that from happening. But if you look at like Shopback or Cash Rewards, then it's very difficult to know. Would you have come to me anyway, and you just remembered, if I just do one more or two more extra clicks, I'll make some money from this, so therefore I'm sort of cheating the system? Or have you discovered now, let's say, shopping on Maya's website is now, you haven't really thought of it, and now you will because it's being offered to you. So I guess the question is if someone puts down 5 fake email addresses, or just says to all your friends, look, can you just click on this, and all you've got to do is just sign up to the newsletter, and then I'll get my free course, then you can end up with a lot of sort of people trying to game the system and garbage. But if it's genuine, like Duolingo would be a great example of, a lot of people do want to learn another language, and so they might not have thought about it, and they might not have realized just how great Duolingo is and how easy it is to access. So I don't know why they haven't done it, but yeah, I mean, I think if you said you can get rid of ads for the next week whilst you're invested in going from beginner to intermediate, if you get 5 other people to begin a course, yeah, why not? Like that creates a level of commitment. It's a great app. Having done it myself, that it's a delight and surprise thing. So once you do sign up, then I think you'll be quite blown away, and then you're the next person sort of sucked into learning schoolboy Spanish or French or whatever.
Yeah, I think on the other side of things, like I've heard sort of requalified people say that they gave me perspective that them having to tell another friend, that is a pretty high ask. Like they'd prefer to just pay $50 or $100. And I was like, damn, like I wanted to create a model where I no longer had to push and convince people to come in. I have a valuable product. I don't want to sell it. I want word of mouth to kick in. And I thought this model might be it, but I guess I would have to test it to really see.
Yeah, no, that's a really good perspective. I'm like that myself. I tend to keep those opportunities for sharing stories with people or offers or links or whatever to things that I think are really useful and might add value or they might find interesting. And so therefore I value my sort of my own personal brand, either in my friendship, professional network or whatever, to sort of not devalue that by just spamming them with an offer of, a fidget spinner for half price. Because I'm like, well, you're going to look at me going, why the hell are you sending me links to half price fidget spinners? Like there must be something in it for you. And now I feel that you've sort of raided our friend piggy bank to get something free for yourself. And that's like a little bit grubby. So I think, I think if that thing like Duolingo, I think genuinely a lot of people harbor the notion of being able to speak another language or an additional language. So I don't think people would judge you for that. But if you are sending out, links to, I don't know, Pokemon cards, then people will say, why is Andy sending me like links to like, half price Pokemon cards? Or, if I buy 10 cards, I'll get the portfolio book to go with it. It's sort of like why? Like what? And then it's, that's always the problem about signing up to phone plans, energy offers, insurance or whatever, those sorts of things, because it's sort of, do you know me well enough to know that I'm in the market to change my electricity provider? Probably not. You don't know anything about my electricity needs. So why are you now sending that to me? So it's tough.
Now, over the last few days, the market has taken a huge hit. Do you think we are going into a recession? And if we are, what's your biggest advice on how businesses can survive the next 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do. There are a lot of signs, that you're young and fresh-faced, and I'm old and warty, so I've sort of lived through a few recessions. There is a little sense of, a lot of recessions are caused by a withdrawal of credit facilities, particularly mortgages and that sort of stuff. I don't know. I don't see that on the horizon in a kind of what happened in the GFC, where the banks all stopped lending to each other because they didn't know that the other bank was good for the money, and there was a lack of trust in the system. So that's what kind of caused that one. And then there's a dot-com boom. There's been different things that have caused different stuff. I think this one, there's a bunch of factors around inflation, which obviously maybe the genie is a little bit more out of the bottle than anyone would like to admit. The RBA obviously got caught, last week in having to suddenly put up rates, which is hard considering that they've been telling people for a long time that they would definitely not be putting up rates until 2024. And if you're a home buyer and you said, you've gone out there and said, oh, I won't go for fixed rate mortgage, I'm going to go for a variable one because the RBA governor has told me don't worry about it, then suddenly that shock and that sort of, all of my plans have relied on this advice, I think could be very troubling. Plus all the things that we're not in control of, all those external inflationary factors, as well as now probably building wage pressure that might cause local impacts. So you end up in this, a recession is mostly a lack of confidence and a lack of money supply, credit. So I don't worry so much about the credit side of it, apart from just the price of credit as interest rates go up. But the confidence thing I can see hitting us. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting next 6 to 12 months. If we have a change of government, which looks maybe increasingly likely, or a hung parliament, which is maybe even more likely, I don't know. Will that in and of itself create a bit of doubt? And our budget situation is pretty bad. So at some point we've got to start to balance it off, which means pulling money out of the economy, which then sort of predicates more to a recession type thing. So I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I have a nagging feeling that it's going to be, if not a recession, it's going to be pretty tough over the next little while. What to do? It's interesting because I've been now in 2 major sort of impacting events: GFC, and I was at Google, COVID, and I was at Criteo. I think in both cases, businesses tend to overreact and batten down the hatches, and then they take too long to realize that the storm didn't come, and then start to expand again. I would say often businesses that do really well have really good cost control, but they don't get rid of really good talent during tough times, because the second there are any signs of growth, you've now lost your ability to grow with the market again. So I would be looking to, do things like talk with your teams. Like if you're a business like ours, and not like a service business where where bums on seats count, then can you be in a situation where people have the ability to go down to, like, say, 4 days a week? So you're all sort of sharing the pain a little bit, but no one's being like absolutely clobbered, and you're ready for things when they expand. Can you just get rid of extraneous costs? That's where you should be going first, rather than getting rid of, or reducing time with amazing people. So can you get cost out of your business, or just delay, some things that are not really, really important? But I do think that, Google made a mistake. They closed all these little satellite offices. They got rid of a bunch of people. They had a massive squeeze on costs in the GFC. And Eric Schmidt admitted years later, that was a dumb thing to do. They were perfectly placed to do well in a tight environment. So, if you were in hospitality at the start of COVID, of course you need to get rid of people, because it was obvious that was going to be really hit, and there's no way you could survive without doing that. But if you're in an industry that tends to benefit from change, and you're at the forefront of technology and innovation, I think those are the times that you need to be ready to actually go harder and not pull back.
Interesting. And when a recession happens, does like conversion rates just like drop? Like, let's say you had a product and it was converting at 2% when you would market it, and it dropped down to 1.5%. And if your margin is like only 30%, now you're sort of like break even and maybe making a loss, and as a result you just disappear. And a solution would be improve and make your marketing even better, make your product better to keep it at 2% until the market gets back. Or like, what happens, since I haven't been through it?
Yeah, look, good question. And I'm not by no means I'm any expert. You do see there are certain categories of purchases that do drop off really quickly. So for example, new cars, as soon as markets tighten and the recession looms, someone doesn't want to take on a purchase of $40,000 with a car loan, because suddenly, everyone knows, well, maybe not at the moment, but generally, that if you buy a new car and you come to sell it because you're forced to 6 months down the line because you can't afford the repayments anymore, you're going to also lose a lot of money as soon as you drive off the forecourt. So certain categories tend to get hammered much quicker. High-end restaurants and things like that. So people pull away from those like really pricey categories. So if let's say you're a retailer and you are in the discount fast fashion category, then you'll probably do pretty well in that environment. So maybe your conversion rate goes down because you've got more people hunting around than you would normally get, because in the past they may have automatically gone to, let's say, Witchery or Country Road, and now suddenly they're coming onto like the iconic and looking for maybe a lower price point entry point to get a new, dress, shirt, jeans, whatever. So your conversion rate might go down, but your website visitors might go up. And as long as you're not paying like disproportionately for all that extra traffic, then you've got plenty to play around with. So you're in the right place at the right time. It might just play around with your conversion rate. If you're selling, Maseratis, then I would say, you need to batten down the hatches a lot more, because those will tend to disappear, quicker and faster, and will take longer to come back. In a recession, Aldi does really well, and eating out in posh restaurants doesn't. So you need to be, I think, very nimble to be able to switch your focus. If you have a broad range of products at different price points, then you probably need to, just think about what's the right thing for that moment. And I think everyone says they're really good at sort of, analytics and data, or they sort of think they are, and they have a team that does it and everything. But I reckon people are nowhere near as good at picking those trends out. And actually, that's something, I'm not here to spruik our company, but Criteo does really well, because we have, the vast majority of retailers in Australia. So we actually know what products people are looking at, which ones they convert on, what the basket size is. And we've now just literally last week, we just hired and had start a new local analyst to try and find some of those nuggets out of that data, which had previously sort of resided in a database in France somewhere that's been difficult to access. I hope that we'd be able to add value to people. So it's sort of, okay, people were looking at, $200 pair of sneakers before, and now they're looking at $80 ones, because they can't afford the latest edition. They just need to go for the ones that are they look nice and they're comfortable and they're a good brand.
Interesting. So let's say car companies, for example, do they sort of just, during a tough period, do they just operate at a loss, knowing that good times will come back and they'll be able to make back that loss? And do you recommend them to either switch business models or go into hibernation and just cut all costs until the market comes back?
Yeah, I mean, that is really tough, because when you build a car, a huge percentage of the components you're not making yourself, you're buying from other people. So the easiest thing to do is to just, let's say you run 3 8-hour shifts a day over 6 days or something, you can cut a whole shift out. So you can get rid of a whole load of people. You can slow the production line down, but that affects your productivity. You can decide to, literally just turn the lights out on the factory, but that is a huge amount of investment that you've made. And you have to remember that also your suppliers have made. And if you push them into bankruptcy, the day when the demand comes back and you switch the lights back on, that you might find that the person that's making your, brakes is no longer in existence, or you've now got to suddenly transfer the tooling out of them and put it somewhere else. So there's some very, very complex things that happen in cars. Broadly speaking, they will reduce the number of hours per shift, and they will reduce the number of days that you operate, and they'll get to the point where the factory is no longer sort of viable running almost any number of hours in a day. So they will then tend to sort of close the factory for, let's say, 3 weeks, and then let the demand sort of build up and the orders build up, and then they'll bring the people back and they'll fulfill them. Because it is it's a bit like airlines. Car industries can be hugely profitable, but they can be hugely loss-making on the turn of a dime, and that dime is how many units are you selling, how many units is that factory making, and then what discounts are you offering to the consumer. So I think Tesla has some innate advantages in the amount of automation that it has, and the flexibility of its production lines enables it to probably be to flex more than the average. But then, as you saw what happened, the supply chains are very long and take a long time to set up in auto. So what they did in the start of COVID is they then basically went to all their suppliers and said, we're going to cut back our orders of all these things. And one of those things was silicon chips. And if you're Samsung or whoever making silicon chips, you're kind of probably quite happy for that, because at the same time, Lenovo and Apple were selling more laptops, and PS5 and Xbox were coming out with new models. So like, great, well, we can make different chips for people who actually pay us bigger margins, and they suddenly turn their attention to that. The result is now that there's a global supply shortage of chips, and particularly for cars. So you have to be careful with cars, because it's difficult to, it's the impact that you have on your suppliers almost as much as it is to the cost within your own business.
Interesting. Do car companies ever like borrow money in huge loans that would allow them to weather the storm for the next 3 to 5 tough years? Is that a common thing?
Yes, they are very adept at asking governments for subsidies. And in the GFC, you saw the 3 big manufacturers were all about to turn up and beg for government funding. And ironically, they turned up to Washington, D.C. in their private jets, the corporate jets, I should say. And Congress called them out on it and said, you're turning up here begging for taxpayers' money on your corporate jets. What sacrifices are you making? And this is where car companies, they know how many jobs they create in an economy, how valuable those jobs are seen by governments all over the world who clamour to open, give someone a free piece of land to put their, 200,000 a year car factory in. So they're very adept at squeezing money out of governments. And when it's money, it's often loans. So they're on the scale where they have an impact on huge, like thousands and thousands of jobs. So they tend to very, very quickly in any of those circumstances, as soon as things turn slightly negative for them, they have lobbying, machines that go into overdrive, basically claiming to the government of the country where the factories are located, saying it's calamity, we're going to pull out of here and concentrate our production in China, unless you give us a cut price loan or free money or whatever. And they're very adept at it. And so at the moment they'll be doing okay, but 2 years ago at the start of COVID, you'd have seen a lot of car manufacturers turning up at the doors of governments and sort of business enterprise parts of government saying, I need a $200 million loan for 0%, paid back over 40 years or whatever it happens to be, to keep the lights on. And then lo and behold, a year later, everything's hunky-dory, they're making record profits, and now they've just got cheap credit that's been underwritten by a local government.
Wow. Yeah, because as I've done this pivot, I had to focus a lot on the product, the software to create those referral mechanisms, and our revenue just dropped drastically. And I sort of had to do the same thing over the last 6 to 12 months. I've just been getting my team to apply for a bunch of different grants, marketing grants, rebates, startup grants, applying for Y Combinator, and it's just like a constant just see what we can get. And hopefully now that we're launching soon, things will change. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear that car companies do the exact same thing.
And what's been the biggest learning you've had in your business since the start?
The biggest learning, I think the biggest recent shift is that in order to grow something that would really have the ability to scale and reach a lot of people, I can't do what everyone else is doing. Usually where people are making money is they're doing the same thing that someone else has done, but at a better level, and they're sort of making that's where they make their money. The better they can do it than everyone else, that's how much money they can make. And if I play in that game, it's going to be this constant, the market's going to get better, and if I want to be 30% of the market, if the market gets better, I have to improve by 20%. It's this constant grind. But if I went ahead and went my own path and did something different, I no longer have to play that competition. Whatever I make, unless someone else comes in, I don't have to do a better job because I'm the only person doing that. And I think that has been the biggest shift, where it's like, wow, I don't have to do a phone call funnel where we bring in a bunch. One of the things people would do in my space is they'll create like an automated webinar where you run ads, bring them to like a 2-hour automated webinar, have this pitch and then you sort of sell them the product at the end of the pitch. And that's what a lot of people did in our space. But in order to make money, you have to do that really, really good. So I can either spend 1 to 2 years just figuring out, redoing it again and again, getting it better and better and tweaking things to make it work, just for it to not work in 6 months' time and then I have to improve it again. Or I could just go down this other path, but in this other path I'm going down right now, it's unknown. I don't know if it'll work. I'm not making money. It's scary. There's so much anxiety, and I just have to push through it, I guess.
And look, I mean, I think you're incredibly sort of entrepreneurial and brave. And then if at the end of all that, you either are like really successful, you'll be able to look back and say, it's because I made these, bold decisions and went out and had a hypothesis and I went and tested it and it worked. If on the flip side, it doesn't, then whatever you go into next, you'll be able to sort of turn around and go, do you know what? I did these things that I think I would still do again. I did a bunch of these things which I would never do again. And the people I've seen do really, really well in their careers aren't afraid of failure. They don't look for failure, but they're not afraid of failure. And what they do is they carry through the 80% of what was really good in what they did. And they are rigorous in learning the 20% of the things that they would not want to repeat. And then the next one. And that's why I think they sort of say often, many startups, whatever, it's often like the third or fourth one that is the most successful because there's a learning process to go through. And so I think the worst thing is for people to think, I won't do something because I'm afraid of failure. And I would always say that the people I've seen, do the best are the ones who've taken the biggest risks. And that can be even within a corporate environment. I see time and time again that people get frustrated in their careers because they're not making the progress that they hoped. And often the decision was that where they made a mistake is they had an opportunity of going sideways or even a little bit backwards, but they could have gone into something completely new, got out of their comfort zone and learned a new sector or whatever it happened to be. And they don't do it because in their brain, they are taking a risk and potentially either not going forward immediately or they're even going potentially a little bit back. And they don't do it, but then they get stuck in what they're doing. And then in 10 years' time, everybody else who made those decisions and took the greater risks have completely leapfrogged them. And then they get frustrated and they're like, what did that person do? They didn't do it. And it's like they took risks and they learned new things and they were able to, carry with them a huge amount of experience that they got from their first gig into the next one that was a completely different proposition as a role of a job, either or as a company. I look and sort of think, when you have those opportunities of sort of saying, do I take a risk? Do I carry on doing what I'm doing? I would say that you should always err on the side of wanting to take the risk. Now, you can de-risk some of those things, like I said, like with things like pretotyping. You could, look at, let's say, if you're taking a role and I don't know, you're paid $10,000 a year less, but it's a completely new area. Then de-risking it might be saying to your existing boss, if I really screw this up and I hate it, is there any chance of coming back? Let's say, and if you're a good employee, that person will say, of course, I don't know whether it will be that day or week or month, but obviously the next role that becomes available, I'm happy to welcome you back. That's an easy, that's a 5-minute conversation in de-risking that strategy. But any of the job moves that I've made, have always been have always helped me grow. And I look back and go, do you know what? If I was going back to Peugeot as a head of digital now, would I do things differently? And I would. I would have taken more risks.
Yeah, one thing I'm sort of learning is maybe 2 years ago when I sort of went down this new path, I dropped everything, or maybe in the last 9 months, I've been fully focused on studying.com and the education platform. And I said no to everything. I was just laser focused. The pros of that, I'm always balancing between focus versus doing a lot of things. So now that, our cash reserves are getting lower and lower, I've been in emergency mode where I'm opening a few drop shipping stores, opening a few e-commerce stores. My friend wants to try something on Amazon with me, so I'm saying yes to that. Someone wants me to, I'm saying yes to everything, and I'm doing a lot of things. Now, what I'm realizing is, as I'm doing a lot of things, yes, most things don't work, but I'm learning a lot more. Things are opening much faster. Because it didn't work, it led to something else, and there is a lot of value in doing a lot. But if I went ahead and focused on my one company, my one thing, that probably could have grew maybe 10% faster. And since it's a pretty big, well, that 10% could compound much, much faster than these little side businesses I do. So there's this constant juggle.
Yeah, and it is about spinning plates. And I think if you don't have, if I go back to my time at Google, there were many moments at Google where Google was in danger of being like overly focused on search to the exclusion of all other things. And it acquired YouTube and DoubleClick and Android and these sorts of things. But still, the main money was coming from search. So you could have taken the view of everything else is a side project and a low side project at that, because of the absolute money-making machine that is search. But I think if you think, here's my main gig, the sort of Pareto principle of it, here's the 70, 20, 10. I need to put 70% of my effort into the thing that I think is going to give me the best return over short, medium, and long term. But I don't want to do that at the exclusion of all else, because somebody else might come out with a competing product that's better, better priced, whatever, better resourced. So then I need a 20% gig, and then I need a 10% gig. And so I think you're doing the right thing. If there's a way that you can sort of generate a small bit of income through an Amazon store, why not? Will you ever, by using somebody else's platform and in that type of environment, will you ever become a billionaire? Probably not. But can it keep the wolf from the door? Yes. And is it something you can also, is there any transferability of skills into that, so that not only can you keep the wolf from the door, but actually it can help you sort of refine your attitudes to the 20% project and the 70% one? If yes, awesome, then absolutely do it. If not, then it's like, okay, I'll just do that. I'll use that as a kind of like a paper round. It's literally just for making money, and that's all it is. And then but compartmentalize it, so you're not overly investing your time in that 10% area if it is just a pure, money making thing. Because otherwise, if you might as well just take a barista job at the weekend and earn money that way, because then you can just switch your head off and just get to chat to customers, and then you actually might find someone who's in the same line of business and wants to invest in your company. I don't know, like, it's sort of, everything's an opportunity cost. And so I think just knowing where these different things sit in your sort of 70, 20, 10 kind of world, I think is really helpful. So you're not overly invested in the 10%. If it's either going nowhere or it has a low chance of, it might go somewhere, but it has a low chance of success.
Yeah, I think something that I realized was, like, I was chatting to another founder, and he said, during a recession, you should double down on what's working, double down on your cash flow. And I was like, damn, like, I sort of dropped my main cash flow to focus on this new business. So when times get tough, I don't have something to double down on. Hence, I'm just saying yes to everything because I'm trying to find something that works. So previously, the previous model that was producing consistent cash flow was creating amazing YouTube content that was curated. I put in a lot of time. It was a bit, I got burnt out talking about Facebook ads, drop shipping, repeating the same thing again and again. When I've grown to, I'm now focused on company culture, hiring, and I want to talk about new things, I didn't want to talk about those things. And the second thing was, I didn't want to sell, and leads would come through from my YouTube content, and I have to sell them, convince them, and tell them why my product's amazing. I got burnt out from doing those things, but that was my main cash flow. And I dropped it because I thought, I was like, what's the point of life if I'm not doing what I enjoy? I enjoy creating amazing products. So I pivoted, and now I'm sitting on something that doesn't make money at all. And I think this conversation is sort of helping me, okay, maybe I should just roll up my sleeves and, start going back and doing the main cash flow sort of business. Maybe I shouldn't go all the way down and get and build some e-com stores, and then I should only take one step backwards and get back into creating content, even though I might not enjoy fully talking about those things. It's sort of work.
And I think there's plenty of place, Andy, to have a balance between those things. I don't know whether you don't need to go, I think, back into it 100%, because it's not what you enjoy. You've only got one life on this planet, or I believe you only have one life on this planet. So maybe you go, it's rather than now that it's a 0%, maybe make that 50%, because you can do it and you can do it well. It's not where your heart is, and then you'll only be 50% as rich as you were doing that as before, but it's maybe enough. And then you've still got a whole 50% that you can apply to your current endeavor. And that gives you a lot more fat to play with. And so that if there is that suddenly like pedal to the metal opportunity, there's suddenly like a break in the traffic and off you go, then you've got the funds and the cash flow and everything to invest. The worst thing will be is that you suddenly realize that there's this amazing opportunity and you've got nothing to put behind it, because then you'll be begging around all your friends. Your lead creation will be your demand for loans from all your mates to help you sort of invest in this amazing opportunity, and that might take you longer to pull all that together than the opportunity. You miss out on the opportunity and it's gone and somebody else comes in.
That totally makes sense. Now, Colin, I've noticed you've worked at Google for a long time, 8+ years, I think. A lot of people don't work at one place. How was Google? What was it like? Did you get a chance to meet the founders like Eric, Sergey, Larry Page?
It is an amazing company, and I would never say anything different. It's changed a lot over that time. So I joined back in 2006, and I left in, when was that, 2018? Does that sound about right? So it's it was 12 years. So almost 2 years in the UK and then 10 years in Australia. Look, the original company and the guys, so Larry and Sergey, and they brought in Eric to be the sort of the mentor really, and the CEO and then chairman. Yeah, so they kind of learned. It was kind of like Shark Tank style. What they were getting out of it, of employing Eric, was a sort of a grandfather of the Silicon Valley, tech industry. So they obviously had taken a lot of advice. They met him at Burning Man Festival, I believe, of all places. So there was a lot to love about Google and the craziness and the fact that, let's be honest, there were many Googles that came before Google, some that we remember and some that, never went anywhere. They just, they were lucky with timing. They had a great product. And they were very daring in the early days. I think what I would say is they look after their staff really well. There's lots of very, very, very smart people there. One of the challenges of any of those big companies is, over time, if you sort of overhire really, really smart people, eventually as the industry goes from high growth to medium growth to slower growth, then you've got a bunch of people who don't want to leave because it's an amazing company that's well paid, but they all want to be promoted. And because unless you want to end up with this very, top heavy, inverted pyramid, that's not possible. And so inevitably over time, then people get, sort of disappointed with their career growth. And that then translates into an environment where there's a lot of time spent on trying to sort of fluff up your internal portfolio, to make it look better, to get promoted, which then turns from being productive use of smart people's time and ideas into unproductive use of time and ideas. And I do sort of think that, it is inevitable that companies mature and then it does become a bit more political. And so therefore you then start to get a level of dissatisfaction of, why did she get promoted? Why did he get promoted and I didn't? Or other people looking at you every day and thinking, why won't you just sort of, get out of my way and let me take your job and get promoted? And it's hard because people don't want to leave Google, especially in the days when we used to go into the office, 5 days a week. Amazing office spaces, free food, really collaborative and energetic and inspiring environment and colleagues to work around. And at the end of the day, by and large, you're not saving lives, you're selling media space. Some people in Google are working on some of those projects, but the majority are not. The 99% of something people, are working on the core media sales business, search, YouTube, GDN, DoubleClick, etc. So, they have a problem. They have almost like the opposite of a staff churn problem. They have a over staff retention issue, which then leads to, or can lead to, corporate sort of infighting or jockeying for position, and then a whole load of sort of smoke and mirrors glory projects that are kind of created for someone to sort of look good because they want to get promoted and are actually not that productive to the enterprise. So my take from it all was, know when it is, when your time is up. I probably stayed about 1 year longer than was good for me. And I probably started to get into that. My heart's not in this. And I think I would advise anyone, as soon as you start to feel my heart's not in this, then start to look around for your next opportunity. Because it's not a failure to say, my time is done here. I did 10 years at Peugeot, I did 12 years at Google, and I've done 3 years at Criteo and had many careers within those 2 previous companies. And it's not a failing to say that you're done with a company. Nor would I suggest that you just spend a year in each company and hop around. But know probably when you stopped bringing freshness and new ideas and energy to a role, and it's time for somebody else to do that, and for you then to go into a new environment that's going to be, it's going to be out of your comfort zone for a period of time, but it'll be invigorating, and it's sort of, like dating someone all over again, and all the fears and excitement you get from all that, and then eventually you go down into a sort of more stable situation, and in a relationship and a family, that's probably a good thing, that you're not kind of getting butterflies in the stomach every single day and worrying about when your partner's coming home. But I think in a job sense, I think it can lead you to a bit of complacency, and I think that probably had happened about a year before I left Google. So as I started to sort of see that reaction internally and sort of could see that people were not as impressed with me as they used to be, it was like, before you call it out, I'm going to call myself out on it, and I'm going to go and find something else.
That's beautiful. One light bulb moment I had over the last 2 to 3 years was, when I was sort of selling courses, cash flow was really strong. I had a lot of cash reserves. I was like, what should I invest in? Like, I don't want to let this cash just sit here. And everyone's talking about real estate, stocks, invest in these different things. And I just sort of looked at what the founders of Google, Microsoft, Tesla, like what they did, and then like they're not, Elon Musk, like they don't own much real estate, they don't own much stocks, they just reinvest everything back into the company. But how do they reinvest things back into the company? Like what do they invest in? Like they can't buy more real estate, offices. And I was like, wow, like the common thing that all these companies have is they're always hiring employees, people. They're like finding ways to give employees the best experience. They're giving amazing sort of employee sort of packages. They're constantly hiring all the time. And then I realized, I was like, whoa, employees are an asset. You pay an employee, let's say 80 grand a year, they output 160 grand worth of output. And every year they're growing, and the longer they're with you, the more they're worth. And yes, the increase in salary doesn't match the increase in sort of output because they're constantly growing. And I was like, holy crap, no wonder all these top companies are just recruiting all the time, and they figured out the highest returning investment. Am I just imagining things, or is this?
No, you're right. I someone told me once, hire at leisure because you want to make sure that you don't hire the wrong people. However, if you see good people, like we had a situation a few months back where we were interviewing for a particular role, and we saw 2 really amazing people, and I just said, look, we'll just hire both of them. And I then had to go and then just sort of, beg for forgiveness with my head office to sort of say, look, yes, our costs will go up a little bit, but believe me, we will get the return back, because most people who are ex-Google will tell you they miss the excitement of being in the sort of the furnace of invention and everything and all the excitement and stuff that happens within Google, but the actual thing they miss most is the people they worked with. And I think, if you hire a bunch of really smart people, and if you can hire people who are better, smarter than yourself, then amazing things are possible. And the flip is true as well, that you will get dragged down by people who are, demotivated, not quite, the right fit for the role, etc. So that's why it's sort of take time to hire. So be in a hurry to hire, but don't be in a hurry to hire that person. If they're not right, wait, just move on to the next person. And only that's why it was refreshing for me going from Persia, which had like a specific date for applications that closed, and Google doesn't. It's like we are always hiring, we are always on the lookout for good talent, and a job date never closes until we find the candidate that we want. And Criteo is a little bit like that. I think it could be a little bit more sort of discerning, because I think in some parts of our company we can be a bit sort of, we've got a hiring quota to meet and we want to move on to the next bunch of hires. But I think in a business, if you can possibly afford it, employ smart people. Most people, even if they're not exactly trained to do the thing that you need them to do, if they're smart, if they're intellectually curious, if they're hungry, if they are team players, then amazing things will happen. And all the things that you might think about your business, Andy, and what you have plans for will be tested and challenged by amazing new talent that comes in and says, why aren't we doing this? I've spotted an opportunity. I was talking at the IAB debate I got chatting to this random person and they were talking to me about this thing. I reckon we could pivot a bit towards that. And you're like, I haven't even thought of that. And I certainly don't have the skills to do it myself, but go nuts and go make it happen. And, I think if you're lucky enough to be able to have enough cash flow to hire really smart people can do amazing things. And it's not, I don't necessarily mean just academically smart. They're just, intellectually curious and have like drive and passion. As a Miney Carnegie, who used to run Google and now is at ANZ, told me she'd rather tame a stallion than flog a donkey. And I kind of keep that to heart. It's when you're going through the interviewing process or you meet someone and you sort of might have an eye on them to hire them. If the question you're asking yourself is, are they a bit too much? Are they too high energy for my environment? I mean, like, obviously, I'm not saying hire crazies, but I mean, like, I would say hire them. People with energy and passion, it's easier to calm them down and just steer them and guide them a bit, and then just make them realize that, maybe they need to sort of just, take a breath, than it is to sort of try and whip someone up who's just, their heart's not in it, or they don't have the skills.
One thing I've sort of struggled with was that as I sort of grew my team, I find myself because I think I didn't have the budget. So right now, we have like 20 employees, but they're all sort of outsourced. They're sort of in the Philippines, everything from editors to copywriters, recruiters, people to help with PR, social media. And then I find myself with each one of those things, I could sort of do a pretty good job where I'm a bit frustrated because that person, their sole job is to do copywriting, and 1% of my brain power can go to copywriting. And I could look at our weekly email campaign and be like, this could be done so much better. But then recently I've sort of leaned into that. Like, that's sort of why I'm the CEO. That's why I get paid how much I get paid. That's why I have 100% equity in the company. And I heard a story about how Elon Musk, there could be like a problem that engineers are struggling with, and they can't figure out the problem for 6 months straight. And apparently, I don't know if it's true, but Elon Musk would come into the room, see the problem that this team has been working months on, and be like, yep, do this, change that, yep. And then he would solve the problem where these educated engineers were struggling with. And I definitely could relate with that. and it really normalized my problem. But at the same time, I do have to increase my cash flow to hire people that are better than me at those individual things. But maybe even at those individual things, I still might have different perspectives and might still want to critique that person. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's always a tension between steering a ship and then micromanaging every last little bit. I think it's also true that you need, when I say diverse, I don't mean male female diverse, which is often things are boiled down to. You need a diverse team of talents. If you end up with a bunch of people who all get on with each other and they would all naturally kind of, if they had met in any other environment, they would naturally just come together. It's probably not exactly the right team. It's great that they all get on, but getting on can also mean groupthink and not challenging the status quo. I remember when I first joined Criteo, and this person now, she's for personal reasons, her husband had an amazing opportunity with McKinsey and moved to Sweden. So he had an opportunity with McKinsey in Sweden as a partner. So he needed to move. He had the bigger job, and so she sort of followed him. But anyway, I just remember my first week at Criteo, we had a team activity, and it was going to an escape room. And apparently, I wasn't in her group. She absolutely blasted it, and they were out in like record time, because she's one of those people that just has a completely different way of thinking to the rest of the team. So while they were all in groupthink of all being polite with each other and saying, we think this is how we solve the puzzle, she was on the other side of the room looking at it from a different perspective and found the answer. And yeah, she wasn't not a team player. She wasn't awkward to deal with, but she definitely wasn't the, hey, where are we all going for lunch together type person. She was quite an individual. So if you were hiring on that basis of like, is she the best fit, and are we going to end up having amazing camping trips with her, you probably wouldn't have chosen her for that role because she's a bit of an individual. But man, like, she could cut through and see things that other people couldn't. And you need those people, as long as they're not so jarring and so destructive to team culture. You need enough people, enough composition of different views and talents to be successful. I was having a conversation yesterday. I think it'd be fair to say a lot of people in the industry are not necessarily the biggest fans of the current government. In that sort of slight sort of demographic of people who are sort of central, sort of economically right, sort of socially liberal types. I think that's reasonably characteristic of a lot of people in marketing. But one of the people in my team, unbeknownst to me, is absolutely out on the right wing. Not in the sort of Clive Palmer, Alan Jones, but like socially, but like economically, it's sort of like, each man for himself type thing. And you wouldn't know that from him, but it's great that you have someone who has a completely different way of coming at the world. We might not think he's right. He doesn't think that we're right, probably. But to have someone with a very different perspective, as long as they're not like, corrosive to a team culture, then I love that. I love having a really diverse team. Like there's probably only like 4 Aussies in our team out of 20 people. Everybody else comes from, they've got like 2 or 3 people, Malaysian backgrounds, Italian, French, Brit, like 2 Brits, El Salvador, Mexico. We've got a lot of different, countries represented, and that's different education systems giving people different ways of looking at problems, different ages, different levels of experience, different backgrounds. I think that's a real strength.
One thing that I learned from Google and reading their book was I started hiring generalists, people who sort of were really, that they had skills, like the requirements were like the test. I would hire sort of these virtual assistants, and I'll be like, okay, what are places you've traveled to? What are some example of things you volunteered for? Hey, based on when I sent you this message to when you replied the answer, how long did that take? So I'd ask these random questions, and I've been just hiring generalists. What are your thoughts on generalists? And something that I learned from Google.
Look, I agree. It's tempting in the hiring process, I think, to look at a CV and say, does that CV align almost perfectly with the job description? I one of the things I learned from Google in the hiring process was, let's say my role in the hiring process was to test someone's, sort of cognitive ability. And so you give them a completely sort of like invented but realistic scenario to kind of go through, and you just want to see their thinking. It's not something that you need to make sure it's not something that you know too much about, because then your expectations of what they need to know will be too high probably. So, one example I used to use was, you're setting up a business. For example, you're setting up a, your friend is wants to set up a business, and they want to set up a coffee shop. They're asking you that they want to put a business plan together because they've got to go and speak to the bank to get a loan. What are the things that you would look at as to the sort of the research that you would do to understand whether their coffee shop idea is good? And a lot of people were a bit flawed by that, and I sort of have to explain, like, there's no right or wrong answers. I just want to see how you think. And some people are so desperate to get to the answer, they think the answer is to come up with the perfect business plan for the bank manager. The answer is, what are all the inputs that you need to consider? And then once you've got those inputs, you then go to the next phase. It's like, okay, so now that you've described to me that the price of coffee, the location, the type of clientele, the hours that you're going to open, the other products you're going to sell, cost of staff, all these different things are important points. Then what you're going to do with that information. And some people just they freeze because it's like they've been taught to always have the right answer. And as you say, generalists don't. Generalists are sort of like, well, that's an interesting problem. Well, this is how I would come at it. And you would have some people try and tell you the right answer, and that's not good either, because in a business, you'd rather people tell you the truth and be honest than tell you what you want to hear. And then some people would over-engineer aspects of it. And so, again, down to the pretotyping, it's, I would go to Forrester and see if there's a report on the cafe industry in Sydney or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, imagine there isn't. And they start to sort of go, okay, I'll Google it. And you're like, do you know what? The smartest people say the most important thing for a cafe is demand. How am I going to assess demand? Footfall past a particular location, and then see what the competition is. If there's 20 cafes in that location by a station, like what's the size of the queues? Just go and observe. And then that's the thing that you need to tell your friend is go and observe. Like, so you want to be like a city center location by a station. Okay, so the hours you're operating are quite limited because it's commuting times. So you're going to need to go to those locations and see what the competition is, how many people are going past, and of the places that are there, like, is there a line of 20 people for coffees, or is it like being served like so they can fulfill the demand straight away? I think generalists can get to that quite easily because they're not trying to leverage a knowledge stream that they can tap into. And that's why I think it's good to use, I'm not like completely theoretical, like as in like the things that Google sometimes used to do in the past, like how many, ping pong balls can you fit in a bath? It's like, okay, well, that's a sort of trigonometric maths question, really. That's kind of, and why would you ever need to do it? So it needs to be something that's related to, we do have business problems. We do have to work our way around these things with ambiguity and with little information. How are you going to get from a little information to something that's sensible? That sort of thing, I think, helped us. I lots of people would really struggle in that environment, and maybe I turned down a lot of really amazing hires. But of the people that we did hire, I do think we ended up with a lot of very, very good talent.
I think you're right. Just asking the question, and not about the answer they give, but how they break down the answer. Have them be like, okay, so first I would see what the bank would look for. Okay, now I'm thinking the bank will probably look for, success probability. How much income would it make? How long will it take for them to be able to return the bank their money? Okay, how do we show a high success? And then as I'm breaking it down, I guess that's sort of what you would be looking for, someone that can break it down to you live and sort of go through it. And I think most people are scared to do that raw breakdown verbally out.
Yeah, I have one guy that I asked him, like I said, just to explain your thinking. And at the time it was quite in fashion, have we reached peak oil? So I said, so he wanted just to answer the question. I said, no, I don't want you to answer the question. I want you to tell me how you would go about what are the different things that you would look for to be able to answer the question, and gave him the whiteboard and the pen. And he just wrote down peak oil ? And then sat down and tried to talk to him. I was like, no, I don't want the answer. I want you to sort of tell me, what are the things that you know? Like, if you don't know anything about that industry, then where would you get that information from? Mm-hmm. And then I said, just dot points. So if you don't know anything about it, say, right, what I would do is I would go to the OPEC website and understand and see if they've got papers on this. But he just literally I don't know how. I say, I just want to see how you think. That's all, and what your discovery process would be. And he just kept on sitting down and and then folding his arms and trying to, just saying, well, yes, we probably have reached peak oil. I was like, but why do you think that? And he just, and then other people on the interview panel had said it. I just don't think, like, he's got an expertise in media buying. He's not, like, that's it. He's got that one skill.
And then how'd you go about with that recruit? If you're looking for media buying and was really, really good at it, did he not pull through because he couldn't do that test?
Well, yeah, it was, and others. So, there's somebody else who's giving them scenarios of, like, have you ever been in a situation where you've been in conflict with a colleague? What was the situation? What was the core problem? How did you resolve it? What did you learn? Would you go and do the same thing differently, or the same again? So you have other people, with reasonably structured interview techniques to be able to sort of try and understand whether this person's been in different scenarios. And again, it's not, it's obviously if someone said, virtually every place I walk into, I'm in conflict with all my colleagues, and you probably say, okay, maybe not for us. But most people have had some sort of conflict. It could be professional. It might be a difference of opinion about a project, about hiring someone. It could be about a promotion, a rating that someone's got, a salary package that someone's offered that you didn't, whatever it happens to be. You can have a different opinion. We all have, it'd be a boring place if we all share the same ideas. And so you're looking for the people who are admitting that they're able to sort of reflect and not just come up with the first thing, but kind of go, interesting. Like, well, there was a situation where, my boss wanted me to commit to a project and I just didn't believe in the project and everything, but I eventually did. You want to see someone, like, almost discovering it with you and sharing that, and then them be able to reflect kind of on the fly, and also some of the sort of head on the pillow at night reflections that they've had about would they do things differently, because then that shows the ability to kind of learn from mistakes and deal with stress and things like that. And so I think Google does have a very good, rigorous hiring process. It's often been criticized as being overly academic or formulaic, but I think by and large it's served them very well.
Yeah, one of the questions I was going to ask, but I think you sort of answered it, was I was going to ask, like, would you hire people who are really, really good at that one thing but lacked in those other skills? Now, and then I started thinking about my best hires. Usually, if someone's really good, they're usually rounded. Rarely do I find someone that is really good in one thing and bad at communication, bad at, working in a team member. Like, that scenario never comes up, so I shouldn't be asking this question.
No, you should be able to screen for it. I have seen in my career people who were hired for a very, like, based sort of almost on their CV and their ability to walk themselves through their own CV, which is obviously they defined the terms of reference. They're going to talk to their terms of reference, their CV and their experience. They get hired, and then you realize that they're actually not that great, and they themselves are actually stuck in a career and they don't know what to do because they're not that great in their career, and they don't have the strength to re-educate themselves and to go on a training course and completely pivot to something else. And those are the ones I think are the most, they're the most susceptible to when you look at a CV and you think, oh my God, that's exactly what we need. And then you go through the interview and you don't really ask those questions, the searching questions. You just really get them to repeat their CV to you, which they've obviously honed into the most perfect version of themselves. And then when they come into your business, they're just not that adaptable because it wasn't exactly like their last place, which, by the way, had probably taken them longer than average to master. So now they're going to take longer than average to master that environment. And once they do, then they're always going to give you the same consistent output. And in our industry, in the tech space, like the thing that you did last year, you can't be still doing now. The world moves too fast.
That makes a lot of sense. Like even if I hire someone that's really good at one thing, time changes, and if they lack those other skills, they wouldn't have the skill to evolve. Last question, Colin. What, with all your years of experience working at all these big companies, managing, huge companies, a lot of team members, what do you see that us smaller businesses don't see? What questions should we be asking?
That is a great question that I don't really have a very good answer for. Because I think you guys are much better at so many things. It's just that you don't have the comfy umbrella of an organization that's already worked out almost exactly what its product offering is. It's so much easier to have joined a Google that had already worked that out, and then you are just there to go and help them execute it and take it to a really schmick level. So on that, I would say, actually, when Miley Carnegie came in to Google Australia, she came in after, I don't know, let's say 30 years at Procter & Gamble. Now, Procter & Gamble is a very, very well-oiled machine, like Peugeot would be, Toyota, etc. They are very slick manufacturing operations that are good at sales and marketing too. And so what Miley noticed is that lots of smaller, scrappier organizations are somewhat chaotic and poorly disciplined and organized. The reason I'm telling you that is because about a year later, she realized that she'd introduced a whole load of process and admin into Google and had gone too far. And she recognized that's what Procter & Gamble had done. They used to be an amazing innovator. And when you were young, and when I was even young, Procter & Gamble were constantly coming out with new products that addressed a certain thing. So even like Pantene as a shampoo, I remember when that sort of came out and was sort of addressing that need for like an everyday amazing shampoo that sort of made your hair feel glossy, blah, 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 blah. Now they've stopped innovating because everything is about efficiency. So I would say that as a small company, you are likely to be more chaotic and less efficient than a large established one. However, if you are growing and if you're in a space where you need to adapt all the time and you're going for growth. So when you kind of find that amazing pill to take in your business because it's the right formula, it's working. I would not beat yourself up that you are slightly chaotic. However, I would bring in somebody into the organization who has worked in a very organized corporate environment, who can bring a level of sanity to the chaos. So like energy and adaptability and a little bit of chaos, I think, are good. Generally, small businesses tend to lurch from one thing to the next because they're finding their way. But and I think that's fine until you find that absolute, here's the sweet spot. Then you need to start to hire in a couple of people who know how to make that engine sing and, just tune that engine beautifully, but not to the point where it stifles everything, where there's no room for stepping outside of what was being defined. And I would say when I joined Criteo, it had gone through that process of going through from a chaotic startup, high growth, all over the place. It then over-engineered itself and then became too rigid, and then has had to sort of tack back to a compromise between the two. So I don't know your business in detail, but I think typically small businesses tend to be a little bit chaotic and not as structured and planned and have enough processes. But then on the flip side, than you can be in that overly planned.
Got it. One thing that you mentioned was big businesses have things sort of figured out, and then sort of they employ people to sort of make it better and you know, make it all shiny. Who are these people that can figure things out and build out, you know, a whole sales funnel that is profitable and turn, you know, leads into paying? Like, who are these people that can build things out? And can I just hire one of them for, you know, $150,000 and have them build out like a funnel that makes up $500,000 a year?
Yeah, look, I've got, you know, someone in my team, and I think we make a good partnership, although she might say otherwise. And like, she's amazing at execution, and doesn't have she's ambitious in her career, but is not the person who wants to be in the limelight. She wants to be the best kind of 2IC, the person who has opinion on everything and therefore knows how the business needs to be and is not shy of saying what needs to be done, but doesn't want to be the person up on stage and collecting the awards at the ceremony. And so you need that person who is, I wouldn't even describe her as being introvert, not at all. I just think there are people who their satisfaction comes from a job well done, rather than being constantly about, you know, moving on to the next thing. I'm guilty of having a lot of ideas and not the ability to pivot from my idea into executing it. And I think, you know, this person in my team that I'm sort of referring to, she'd be the first person to say, I've got plenty of ideas, but I don't know whether I enjoyed doing that. I'm much better at listening to your idea, helping you refine it, and then turning into a thing. And that's I think the satisfaction that she gets, which is to, you know, bring something to life. And dare I say, this is going to be a very sexist thing to say, and hopefully it comes across in the right way. But I think that typically women tend to be the harshest sort of self-critics, and tend to be more perfectionist than men, who tend to have a lot more confidence. And so I've often found in my career that I partner very well with women who are able to help me take my ideas and make them into reality. I hope, and maybe I'm not being very good at this, but I hope I've been able to help them progress in their careers without them needing to be that front person who's leading the flag and leading the charge. That's not to say that I've met plenty of women who can. It's just, I think, as a sort of sad thing, I think many women have a lot of self-doubt, and so therefore tend to be very good at these things, because they only want to move forward when they feel 150% confident in their abilities, and therefore in that project's abilities to move ahead, and therefore are able to take it and make it work really well. Whereas I think people like myself tend to be full of confidence and lack the ability to scan the dangers on the horizon. And so therefore my half-baked plan often doesn't come to fruition, because I'm not as used to checking it and then refining it and then putting it into practice. So that's worked for me in my career, but that also might just be who I am, and therefore who I best partner with. But it's something that I've seen quite a few times at a distance, that men are good at talking a good game. Women can be equally good at talking a good game, but they're often much better at putting it into practice.
Yeah, I think I can definitely attest to that, because majority of my team members probably have it's probably like 13 females and like 7 males, or even 14, 6. And I do find that the women, they're sort of more steady. They sort of do things that they're a bit more afraid to try new things, but they're open to that feedback. Where, you know, I would come in, I'll be like, hey, we should do this, that, and that, and they'll be totally open by it. Whereas the men, they're sort of, it takes me to repeat, hey, I think you should do this a few times for the to take it, because there's a bit more of that ego, but they're also willing to be adventurous on their own and try their own ideas. So I definitely can attest to that.
Yeah, I don't know what it is in society, and I'm not an anthropologist and behavioral psychologist, but there must be something probably in our society and education systems which lends itself to men are given more a chance to have a go without having to prove themselves, and then be, you know, patted on the back and rewarded for trying. And women tend to sit back more. I'm not saying everyone, but tend to sit back more and wait to be sort of tapped on the shoulder to sort of say, I think you're ready for promotion. I remember there was a study done at Google where they, particularly in the engineering community, they automatically allowed people to nominate themselves for promotion. And they had, and for females, they noticed that males by far and away outnumbered you know, as a percentage, more put themselves forward for promotion. So when they introduced that scheme, they actually had to send out notes to female staff to say, don't forget to put yourself forward for promotion. You may be more ready than you think. And I think that's, I mean, it's kind of cute and it's sweet, but on the flip side, if we're being, you know, harsh with ourselves, we probably are very tempted to listen to the confidence of a male with a good idea and who they are and what they want in life, and not necessarily ready for a female to be as pushy. So that's something that I need to always try and remember, is that, and you know, I've been called out. So I'm far from perfect, where, you know, I've had male people, you know, male members of the team come to me and say, when am I going to get promoted? When's the next opportunity, and things like that. And then you feel like you have to address that. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of very hardworking, very competent, extremely smart women who are not making the same demands, and it's easy to overlook them. So that's another, I think that's another blind spot, sort of conscious bias that I know that I'm guilty of. And so I try to, you know, remind myself, but it still could be a damn sight better.
You're so right, because there's this sort of conservative nature where they haven't been, you know, it's only in the last half a century that women have been really into the workforce, and, you know, they've just gotten here. They don't want to, you know, they're a bit more worried to raise their hand, and that definitely does get overlooked. You're 100% right. Your sort of right-hand woman, where she's sort of the person that executes on a lot of your ideas, what keyword should I be looking for on LinkedIn? Is it people with operational, like, do I search operational managers? What type of people are the type of people that can build out systems and figure things out? Then you can, you know, fit people in.
Yeah, look, if I sort of think about some of either the roles or the types of things and the experience, I think that is more reflective of what you might be looking for. So people who have been, you know, like, you know, chief of staff, you know, head of strategy and ops and those sort of things, that people who are like in their CV, it is probably less about shouting about the revenue and the targets that they've hit, although those things are obviously important. But let's be honest, in a CV, most people, I'm not saying they lie, but they tend to sort of exaggerate those things. I don't ever remember seeing a CV where someone said, I usually get about 70% of my, you know, targets. So, you know, you will tend to see that more in a male CV, but I would argue, or people who are in sales, because they know how to kind of oversell themselves. So I would say that you'll probably like to see, you know, initiated this project, you know, launched something, you know, embedded a new process in the organization. It's those things, or you know, obviously when you get to interview them, then actually get them to go through the boring and minute details sometimes of a project they've worked on. And then you can see whether they were the passenger, the one that, like me, the person who had the ideas, or the person who actually put it all together. And when you ask them, like, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you go with this vendor? And then they've got the answer. They're like, well, we went through a process and we had 4 people in, and, you know, you can see when people are detail oriented enough that they know exactly what the objective was, and they were able to start off with, maybe an ambiguous process, and then go through a rigorous selection procedure and testing and everything to get to the outcome. And those are the people that you then sort of say, and you have ideas, because you don't want someone who's just going to execute on everybody else's ideas and never have one themselves. And that's certainly not true for the person I'm talking about. This person's got loads of ideas. They're just very comfortable in helping you refine yours with their ideas, rather than be the person who goes, it's my idea or nothing. Because there's a lot of people, like we are now, and I'm very, very guilty of being armchair generals, of knowing how the world should work, but then actually not very good at doing it, of which, Putin's probably a great example right now. Knows what they want, knows what the idea was, doesn't know how to execute it, and doesn't have a bunch of people around him, in this case, who really do know how to execute it with calamitous results. So, on a sort of lighter note, you need a balance of people, but I think we tend to over-index to the people who shout from the rooftops about what they can do, rather than actually look for the evidence of what people actually do.
Now, these people that often initiate and launch different systems and projects, do they usually have like chief of staff, head of strategy in their sort of LinkedIn sort of job description?
Yeah, or like, it will have like, strategy, operations, organization, team management, and to be honest, like some of the best people learnt their craft, in our industry, they learnt their craft through things like being account managers and account coordinators and things like that. And you want to sort of see the evidence that the reason that they've progressed from one thing to another is because they've absolutely nailed their role. And if it's not evident within the CV and you speak to them, they can talk to you about why they were the best a campaign manager working for, in my industry's case, like, as at a media agency, and they're a campaign, a manager, or, account coordinator or something. And if they can tell you what they did, and if they are focusing on the person they spoke to, the deal they did, rather than what I did was introduce a new process for, pipeline management or whatever. And what I realized is that the team as a whole was, doing blah, 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 blah. That's the difference, is a level of like rigor and detail and determination to achieve, I wouldn't say perfection, but achieve like a really schmick outcome, like outcomes focused, and real outcomes, not just like a number, but detail in the outcomes, rather than, here's all the things that I did, all the inputs, like just, okay, what did you achieve? Okay, I set up a new, part of the website which dealt with returns, because, and it's like, okay, well, tell me, so what was the problem on returns? Okay, we were having a whole load of, stuff dumped back at the, front office desk because people didn't know where to return stuff to, or we were having lots of complaints. They'll be able to tell you that how they diagnose it and how they completely change the process, and were able to completely re-engineer that so that it all worked. And then the vendors that they pulled in for the platform, why did you choose that software for returns? Why didn't you choose another one? They're able to tell you all the different people they met, the different pieces of research that they did to arrive at the best outcome.
Beautiful. Colin, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people find out more about what you're doing, get those articles you're sharing? What's the best place for people to get in contact with you and see what you're doing?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm generally will accept, most people's requests to connect. If all that you want to do is tap into my network, that's absolutely fine. I've been helped a lot on my way up through my career, so I'm more than happy to help people who are trying to reach out in the first place to people in my network. I do post stuff from time to time. Feel free to follow me. Feel free to argue with me in my posts, whatever. Go online, have an opinion. Contact Andy.
Thank you so much, Colin. Like, I had a blast. I just love how you're like really, really knowledgeable. You have this sort of breadth of knowledge, and as a managing director, CEO, you sort of know a bit about everything. And I can definitely tell, like, my piece of paper, I've written like every single, like, I wrote a bunch of little things, all these questions. And you have this sort of humble nature where, you definitely have that Google spirit where you're sort of just down to earth and you're constantly always learning, and I can just taste that.
Look, I mean, I've been very fortunate to work with, this is platitudes. I've genuinely learned of so many amazing people, and met amazing people like yourself, I think. Like, we just met at an event, and I was just really blown away by the way that you tackle the little challenge, the debating challenge, and how sort of plucky and fun you were in doing it, and how generous you were to the other team, who you were arguing against. And I wish you really, the best of luck with studying.com. I think you are a genuinely, a brave, entrepreneurial, innovative person. So, good things happen to good people, and I know that you'll be successful, in whatever it is that you do. And some things you just will just take off and rip like crazy, and that's true for everyone. And some things will be hard yards, and then we'll mess up on some things and make the wrong decisions, but just learn from it.
Thank you so much, Colin. I really appreciate that. I just love your kindness and energy. And yeah, this was a great freaking episode. I know this is, I think this might be one of the longest episodes. I've always wanted a long episode, but I haven't found someone that I can sort of juggle and go back and forth with this long. So this is, one of, I had fun on this episode.
Same. I really, really enjoyed our chat. And, like, as you probably realized when you first got to meet me, like, give me a platform and you can't shut me up. So the easiest way to shut me up is just put a drink in my hand, and then I'll be swallowing from that. So there's a tip, and there's a piece of advice. If you want to meet me, then buy me a drink.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Colin, and thank you so much if you've made it this far. I really appreciate you guys for listening to this episode. Hopefully you guys got some value and learned something new. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week on the podcast again. Hope you guys have an amazing day, and we'll see you guys next week. Peace.